Against obesity in children one step further or too far. Overweight students are being sent home with letters explaining where they fall on the obesity scale.
So I guess the question, or one of the questions, is should schools tell parents that their kids are an unhealthy weight? Tanya Zuckerbrot, a nutritionist, she's also the author of F-Factor Diet, and she's with us here with more on this debate. So one of the... This letter home idea, should the school be the one doing it? What's your take on that, first of all, as a nutritionist?
Yes, I do think the schools have to get involved, and it's just part of the government policy right now to create a healthier nation. You know, it begins with the fact that if you're overweight as a child, you have an 80% chance of being obese by the time you're 25. We are creating the most unhealthy generation of Americans to date. This is the first time in American history that children have a shorter life expectancy than their parents due to the advents in medicine, technology. Each generation shall outlive the next.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing.
But why is that the government's? I mean, it might be a problem for them, but why are they involved? Why is the school system involved? I mean, they can be involved in other ways, but doesn't this violate a child's privacy?
Well, when we take a look at health care costs, this is when the government does have the right to get involved, is what we're doing, the way that we're eating as a nation. Our health care costs associated for obese Americans increased by 82% from 2001 to 2006. The health care cost for obese Americans is up to $303 billion, and there is no education in the home, so it's proactive.
I got to tell you, I understand what you're saying, without being ridiculously overly editorial on that.
Well, the government's not paying my health insurance, and it's not paying the health insurance probably of many of these children.
But I have 3 kids in school now, and about the only thing that they check them for is to see if they have lice half the time. So to me, it would be useful if you're checking them for other health risks.
I think we need to understand this is something that's proactive. It's not a punishment for your child.
Right.
Being overweight as a child, it goes beyond that. It's just, that's not aesthetic.
It's also educational in many cases for parents, isn't it?
Of course, and we'll talk about that as well. But being overweight as a child, let's just get some stats out there. If you're overweight as a child, you have a 60% increased chance of getting cardiovascular disease. We are now seeing adult onset diseases in kids. That 80% of children who have type 2 diabetes are overweight. So there's this health correlation.
Rather than measuring a child's body mass index and sending a letter home saying your child's fat, essentially, your child's obese, why don't the schools then try and help beyond that? I mean, rather than invading their privacy, why don't they have better physical education?
I think these are all small steps, and it always comes down to funding.
Or don't be serving fries at lunch.
Of course. I mean, when we take a look at the school lunches, and if they have to offer more education. But what you said earlier is extremely valid. The education really needs to begin with the parents. Parents are the gatekeepers of what children are eating. They're responsible for 70% of what that child's eating. The kids are not going food shopping. The kids aren't, putting dinner on the table. So I think where, the schools can get involved is perhaps to do more lecture series, more education for the parents, because it's a trickle-down theory. You can't expect kids to be eating carrot sticks if they're going home and watching their parents eating potato chips.
Right, which is going to be the big, which none of this really solves, unless, or maybe the letter home does solve some of that. Is that your point, that if you send these letters home, the parents will make changes?
I think awareness is the first step necessary for change. I believe that many parents don't necessarily make that connection between health and morbidity, weight and morbidity.
Right.
They're looking at so my kid's overweight, they're chubby, not understanding that right now 1 of every 5 kids has elevated cholesterol levels. The way we're eating and our weight is impacting our health.
Where do you draw the line? You come in for parent-teacher conference and the teacher looks at you and goes, well, you're fat too, right?
Could happen.
Not to you.
No, well.
Tanya, it was great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya.
Important discussion. Tanya Zuckerbrot, be well.
Thank you.